A fast food manager receives a call from a man claiming to be a police officer. He says one of her employees has been accused of theft and needs to be questioned immediately. At first, it sounds routine, but the caller gives very specific instructions. Search her, detain her, follow every order, and the manager listens. Step by step, the situation escalates into something that should never happen, all from a voice on the phone. Because the most terrifying part isn't who the caller is, it's how far people will go when they believe someone is in authority. Before Sandra's life is changed by this one phone call, she's living a pretty normal life as the manager of a fast food restaurant. But then, one morning, her day starts with a problem. One of her employees forgot to close the refrigerator door overnight, causing some food to spoil. The losses come to nearly $1,500, and the restaurant is now short on bacon and cucumbers. Sandra gets the staff together in the kitchen to prepare for the day. Fridays are always busy, so she reminds everyone to stay focused. Cooks need to stretch the limited supplies, and cashiers need to keep things orderly at their stations. She knows they're being monitored by regulatory agencies, so mistakes could mean fines. To make things harder, the head manager, Robert, is sick, leaving Sandra fully in charge. She assigns tasks, addresses the fridge incident, and gets the day started. The morning is quiet at first, which gives employees Becky and Marty some downtime to chat. Sandra tries to be warm with her staff and even mentions that her boyfriend Van recently proposed to her. The girls are happy for her but find her a little odd. As more customers arrive, the pressure on Sandra builds. Van calls to say he's going out with a friend that evening. Not long after, Sandra gets a call from a man who identifies himself as Officer Daniels. He tells her that one of her cashiers has been accused of stealing money from a customer, and the description points to Becky. Sandra calls Becky in. Daniels claims that the head manager, Robert, is already aware, and that the situation needs to be handled quickly. Sandra believes him and confronts Becky, but Becky flatly denies stealing anything. Daniels then asks to speak to Becky directly and tries to pressure her into confessing. Becky holds her ground and keeps insisting she's innocent. Daniels tells Sandra to take the phone away from Becky so she can't make any calls, then asks that Becky's bag be searched. Sandra takes Becky to the staff room and goes through her bag while Becky pleads her case. Sandra warns her that if the theft is proven, she could lose her job. She's unsure what to believe. Daniels reassures Sandra that he takes full responsibility for everything she's doing. He gets back on with Becky and pushes harder, demanding she call him sir or risk getting arrested. Becky complies but continues to deny the accusation. Daniels then presents Sandra with two options. Either the police come and arrest Becky, or Sandra helps locate the stolen money and resolves things quietly. Not wanting a scandal or legal trouble for the restaurant, Sandra agrees to cooperate. Becky feels she has no choice but to go along with the search, though she insists that two people must be present. Daniels speaks with Robert, the manager, who is supposedly on hold, and agrees to this condition. Sandra brings Marty in as a witness. Becky hands over her outer clothes. Nothing is found. Daniels then instructs them to check her underwear, claiming thieves sometimes hide stolen money there. Following his directions, Sandra asks Becky to remove her underwear. Again, nothing is found. Marty is visibly uncomfortable and hands Becky an apron to cover herself. Still finding nothing, Sandra is confused when Daniels gives his next instructions. He tells her to put all of Becky's clothes, including her underwear, in a bag and take it to her car and stash it there. He claims this is to help the police conduct a search without disrupting the restaurant. At this point, Sandra starts to feel that something is off about this man. Daniels then brings up Becky's brother, saying he's under investigation for drugs and that suspicious substances were found connected to Becky. He tells Sandra that she's the only one who can keep Becky out of jail. Following his lead, Sandra collects Becky's belongings and locks them away in her car, cutting Becky off from her own things. Back on the floor, Sandra deals with a rush of customers. She sends Marty out front and assigns Kevin to keep an eye on Becky. When Kevin gets on the phone with Daniels, he doesn't buy it. He knows Becky's brother personally and is confident the whole story is false. He speaks rudely to Daniels and refuses to cooperate. Sandra is frustrated with Kevin, but Daniels doesn't let it go. He starts asking strange questions about Becky's appearance and clothing. Kevin hangs up. Sandra defends Kevin to Daniels, saying she trusts him completely. Away from everyone, Daniels, who is not actually at any crime scene but is instead making himself a sandwich in a different location, asks Sandra personal questions. She tells him she has a fiancé named Van. Daniels suggests she call Van and have him come watch Becky since she trusts him. Sandra agrees. The restaurant gets busier as the evening sets in. Van eventually shows up, a little tipsy from drinks with a friend. Sandra pulls him aside, explains the situation, and asks him to help keep an eye on Becky while she handles the floor. She hands him the phone so he can speak with Daniels directly. Daniels quickly wins Van over. He starts asking about Becky's looks and what she's wearing. He then tells Van to instruct Becky to remove her apron, claiming she might be hiding the stolen money underneath it. Sandra returns before the conversation goes far, but Daniels tells her Van has it covered and asks her not to interfere. Overwhelmed with work, Sandra goes back to the floor and tells Becky she'll check in later. As soon as Sandra is gone, Daniels pressures Van again to get Becky to take her apron off. Van hesitates. Daniels loses patience and addresses Becky directly, threatening to have her arrested if she doesn't do as she's told. Trapped and frightened, Becky gives in and agrees to follow both Van and Daniels' instructions. Under Daniels' directions, Becky removes her apron. Daniels describes what he sees to Van over the phone. He then tells Van to instruct Becky to bend over so he can check for hidden money. Becky nervously complies, terrified of what might happen if she doesn't. Daniels is clearly enjoying the control he has over both of them. Back in the kitchen, Kevin keeps digging. He texts a contact and finds out that Becky's brother is actually out of town, completely contradicting Daniels' story about a house search. Meanwhile, Sandra checks in on Van and Becky. She walks in to find Becky putting her apron back on and gets suspicious. She grabs the phone. Daniels smoothly assures her everything went well. Becky tries to speak up, but Sandra reads her behavior as disrespect and brushes her off. Convinced that things are handled, Sandra returns to her duties. Daniels runs out of call credit, and while he is outside for a smoke and frantically rushes back into his house to scratch and upload more calls credit. Due to the ruckus and braking signal, he tells Van that he ran into some issues in the investigation. Kevin and Marty are both deeply uneasy about everything, but no one is asking for their input. Daniels now tells Van to spank Becky as punishment for her attitude toward Sandra. He then speaks to Becky directly, ordering her to carry out a sexual act with Van to make up for her alleged wrongdoing. He wants the whole thing recorded, so Van props his phone on Becky's back and has her lie flat. Daniels listens in as Van, now fully caught up in the situation, takes advantage of Becky. Sandra comes back and finds Van in a strange, dazed state. She takes the phone. Daniels tells her Van did a great job but is now tired and should be sent home. Sandra lets him go. Van leaves and sits alone in his car, ashamed of what he's done. With Van gone, an older day shift employee named Harold returns to the restaurant. Sandra brings him to the back room where Becky is. Becky looks around and notices security cameras all over the restaurant, including in the very room she's been in this whole time. Harold gets on the phone with Daniels, but he immediately sees through it. He tells Sandra plainly that no real police officer behaves this way. Kevin and Marty agree. Something finally clicks for Sandra. She calls the actual owner, Robert, to confirm whether he ever spoke with or authorized anyone named Daniels. It turns out Robert has been home sick all day. He hasn't spoken to anyone and has no idea who Daniels is. Sandra goes back to the phone and demands answers. Daniels laughs it off, admits it was a prank call, and hangs up. Real police are notified and arrive at the restaurant. They take statements from the staff, speak with Becky, and pull the CCTV footage. Detective Niels is stunned by how far things went, all because people trusted a stranger on the phone without questioning him. The prankster, meanwhile, calmly wraps things up just as his young daughter got back from her grandmother's place. Investigators trace the SIM card used for the calls to a specific state. As they dig deeper, it becomes clear this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Using surveillance footage from multiple locations, they eventually track down and arrest the prankster. They find out that the prankster is actually a telemarketer, thus his convincing and confident speech over the phone. Becky decides to sue Sandra for her role in what happened and for losing her job. Her lawyer, however, advises redirecting the lawsuit toward the restaurant itself, as it would likely be more profitable. Sandra is later called onto a TV talk show to discuss the incident. She presents herself as a fellow victim, skillfully dodges the tough questions, and denies any wrongdoing throughout. In the end, the most shocking part of the whole story is that there was never any real police officer involved. There was no stolen money, no drug investigation, and no official case. Everything that happened that day was triggered by a single phone call from a random stranger. This man had no badge, no uniform, and no real authority, yet he managed to talk a manager into strip searching her own employee and getting her own boyfriend to sexually assault the girl she was supposed to be looking after. Nobody stopped to call the real police. Nobody thought to verify if Daniels was even real. They all just followed instructions because the voice on the phone sounded sure of himself. The scariest thing about the story is not some monster or villain. It is the fact that one unknown person on a phone was able to control an entire restaurant full of adults without ever stepping through the door. That's it for today's story. But before you go, I gotta ask, if you were Sandra, would you do the same thing or report to the actual police? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more twisted stories like this.